Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Well, it's official. The rematch between Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk is going to take place December 21. And that has been confirmed by Turkey Al Sheikh. Obviously, the Saudis are bankrolling Undisputed in a lot of these fights right now. So this is good news. And as you can see here, Michael Benson also confirming via a post. And I think we've all got to sort of, as heavyweight boxing fans, celebrate that we are going to get this. And it looks like all the belts will be on the line. As you may have seen just in recent days, the IBF has agreed for an interim title to be on the line for Filip Hrgović and also Daniel Dubois, which means the main title remains in the mix for that four belt, plus the IBO and all the other sort of trinkets that go with it. So December 21st. That's good for boxing fans. And a little aside here, I'm recording in a hotel room at 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. in Bali, so I have to be a little bit quiet, so slightly hushed tones here. But this is good news for the sport of boxing in the heavyweight division, and this golden run that we've been on in terms of the action, the fights continues. And given the first fight, the action, the drama, the intrigue, I'm sure most of us are really amped for the rematch. There were huge momentum swings in that first fight, and I don't think it takes too much difference if Tyson Fury can be a little bit more active in a few rounds. If he had a little bit more success, obviously the result becomes a lot closer and possibly, he could be in there for a win. But I guess the question is, what can he do different? Certainly there were some things, I think the corner work for Fury towards the end of that fight left a little bit lacking. They seemed to think he was well up and had the fight in control, where I think, based on what I've seen, most people thought Usyk swept basically the second half of the fight and was able to take it in that second half of the fight. And there was a real lack of urgency in the Fury camp, in the corner, and Tyson Fury basically threw his corner under the bus after the fight. So maybe they need to be a little bit more honest with him, especially if things are tight. But also just generally, Fury himself should know in those late rounds, especially rounds 11 and 12, where those rounds were for the taking. He'd got over round 9. He should have been a little bit more active and desperate, trying to do as much as he could to take the fight. He says that he thought he was up and he won. Of course he's going to say that. He's a fighter. But there were some close rounds, and it was generally, a close-ish fight where Oleksandr Usyk, obviously, he hurt Fury bad later in the fight, and he took away most of the rounds. But Fury had rounds 4 to 6 where he was flashy, he was getting on top. But I guess one of the things from that was, did he dump a lot of adrenaline, dump a lot of energy? Will we see a slightly more toned-down version of Tyson Fury in terms of the in-ring theatrics? Because perhaps you could argue that cost him in that first fight. I think one of the things that Fury really needs to do in a rematch is try to use the height and the reach a little bit better. We saw early on, especially in the first half of the fight, he was able to utilize the height and the reach a lot better than the second half of the fight. Perhaps that came down to fatigue in the second half of the fight, and he became a lot more hittable. Usyk was starting to walk straight right in that second half of the fight, where obviously Fury made it a lot more difficult. He was better and on the jab in that first half of the fight. He was able to, just thwart a lot of Usyk attacks and sort of stop them dead in their tracks before they really got going. And I guess the fact that also Fury tired in the second half of the fight, what can he do different to manage his energy a little bit better, aside from, less theatrics and sort of showboating, because maybe that cost him. This came down to the latter half of the fight where he was fading and Usyk took advantage of that. So can he do something different, or is it the fact that his mid-30s legs, that he's got a certain number of rounds, certain amount of energy, and, where he can perform at peak, sort of, to dominate or, to be able to control those rounds. But then after that, there's going to be a drop-off. Certainly a question, because I think that certainly helped Oleksandr Usyk second half of the fight. As he got a second wind, he came on strong, and Fury was the one that was fading, not throwing as many shots, and obviously he got caught a lot, especially in round 9. So Oleksandr Usyk, you'd have to say, if he continues to do what he did in the first fight, largely that will be, again, I think, a successful strategy that's going to work well. So I'm sure there's adjustments that he can make, that he can anticipate Fury will attempt to make, but it's going to have to be adjustments for Tyson Fury. Both these guys, and so I was quite glad to see that it was pushed out a little bit, because I had wondered heading into that fight, given there'd been the delays, ahead of what was the first Undisputed fight, was there an element of overtraining? Obviously, we know Fury had a cut and been pushed back, all that sort of stuff. Both these guys, I think, will benefit from the additional rest ahead of the December fight, because they were talking about September. That would have been quite a tight turnaround. I think these guys go away, they have a break, and then you have a situation, I think they're a bit fresher, and if it happens in December and it's not pushed back, they can really look to peak for that fight. Perhaps there was an element that these guys were training too long. I mean, both these guys, I think, are both past prime. Still very good fighters, but you want to be peaking for your fight and not having to reset things because it's been pushed out another couple of months. As we know, these guys were in camp for a considerable amount of time. Even when Fury, wasn't sparring, he was still training, still taking over. Some of that, you could argue, maybe the balance of that, I don't know. Would that just make a little bit of a difference? Who knows? But it's all there. Fury certainly got a lot to think about, and he needs to come back and strategize. I think his team need to be a little bit more honest with him, especially in the fight. They need to be a bit more urgent. Oleksandr Usyk, well, he seems to, as we've seen again, as a road warrior, just find a way to win. And he was looking a little bit ragged there in the 6th round of the first fight, and obviously shook it off and basically dominated pretty much the rest of the fight. So, and I guess one of the other things, if Fury's ego, has been hurt and the pride's been damaged by this loss, the O is gone, he was beaten by the so-called middleweight, maybe that's going to galvanize him. We'll see. But obviously, I loved the fight. Having another undisputed fight, get the rematch. This is, heaven for heavyweight boxing fans. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.